Joining me today is William F. Jasper. He joined the staff of the John Birch Society in 1976 as a researcher and soon became a contributing editor to the Society's magazine, America's Opinion, and the Review of the News. Over the past 3 decades, William Jasper has researched and written extensively on foreign and domestic politics, national security, education, immigration, constitutional issues, the culture war, and most notably, the United Nations. Bill, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
I'd like to talk today about a little bit about Nelson Mandela, and then we're going to talk a little more about United Nations and your expertise in that. Of course, we have heard of the death of Nelson Mandela, and we've heard him lauded as the civil rights leader. Someone said to me he changed the world. I'm not sure what that means, but someone said that to me. And of course, the world leaders gathered for the memorial service of his life, and he was lauded as really some sort of a hero in everything that he's ever done. And what are the myths and the facts about this man?
Well, it's hard to know where to begin when one considers just the unprecedented, massive global adulation that has been heaped upon him in the eulogies over the past several days. Actually, since he was announced to be close to death last July, all of the praise and adulation started pouring out again, such as we've never seen before. Back in the 90s, when he did his global tour after he came out of prison, even back at that time, as I reported, I've been covering him for decades. There had never before been anyone that had been accorded that kind of global adulation and praise. He was, no pope or king or president or rock star or movie star, anyone has been the recipient of such overwhelming publicity, favorable publicity. And in fact, many of them accorded him the status of savior, of Messiah, of the man who liberated the world, etc. So it's very difficult in a short time to go into how this all came about. But what was reported this last Sunday, and has been ignored by most of the press, although we did a story on it in the New American online, is that the South African Communist Party came out and admitted and praised Nelson Mandela as one of their, not only a longtime member, but he had been, as they said, a secret leader of the Communist Party of South Africa for many years, and a founder of the Umkhonto we Sizwe, which is their terrorist arm. Now, this is all very important for a number of reasons, and it figures in very largely into these huge myths that have been made about him, because the South African Communist Party was not an autonomous indigenous organization. It was a disciplined member of the Communist International, guided and directed and dictated by Moscow, by the Kremlin. They were subservient to their Moscow masters, and the head of the Communist Party was Joe Slovo, who was a KGB colonel. So he wasn't just a communist; he was an actual member of the KGB, the terror goons, the secret police of the Soviet Union. And he, Joe Slovo, and the South African Communist Party operated directly at their behest, and Nelson Mandela was in the leadership of the Central Committee of that organization. So this, you have to look at it in the terms of the 1950s and 60s when he joined up with them. They were leading a global, worldwide terror campaign of terrorists, but also taking over one country after another and turning it into a communist socialist dictatorship, complete with gulags, torture, murder, genocide. And Nelson Mandela was part and parcel of that. And he and his colleagues throughout Africa were doing the same thing all throughout Africa. Some of the most grotesque genocides and murder that were taking place and continue to take place in Africa, all throughout Africa, as a result of the continuation of those policies. So he not only was a part of that, but right up to the very end was denying that he had ever been a member, that he was a member at the time of his arrest in 1958. Well, in my article last July, very extensive one, I brought together all of the information that we had been publishing and others had been for decades, showing Nelson Mandela, his record, and the record of the ANC, the African National Congress, which he rose to the top of. And so in my article in July, I brought together that along with a lot of new information. And our article was Saint Mandela, Not So Fast. In there I go into it in extensive detail showing not only the documents that came out in court trials, in his own handwriting on how to be a good communist, and all of his notes in his communist training programs, and as well as the weapons and bombs, etc., that he was stockpiling and using, and that the acts that he took place in. But also the many colleagues of his who fall into two camps, both those who defected and left the Communist Party, the Communist movement, and then testified about the operations that they had been involved in and testified about Mandela's membership, but also over the last couple of decades, memoirs of many of the communist leaders who admit it and bring forward evidence to show that Mandela really was part of this whole operation. So the evidence was really quite incontrovertible, and yet we had all of the media throughout the world uniformly claiming that no, this is all just fabrications of racists and conspiracy theorists and whatnot. Nelson Mandela is not now or never was a member of the Communist Party. He was for liberation of the people of South Africa. Well,
so then let me ask you a question. So is it that everybody is completely ignorant of this in the mainstream media, or there's a political agenda? And do world leaders that supposedly come from free nations, do they not know this?
Well, I can't vouch for the knowledge of each and every world leader, politician, or news editor, etc. What I can tell you is that we have been publishing this material for decades. Others have as well, and have presented it directly to many of these media representatives, reporters, editors, commentators. And it appears they do have a definite agenda to suppress the truth and to distort the truth and to pass on falsehood. So what?
How does that tie in though? You look at a figure like Barack Obama, who was lauded all around the world, gets the Nobel Peace Prize before he does anything. People are falling on their faces, crying like he's some kind of messiah. Then you get this Mandela guy, who people look at as this world. What is going on globally? I guess is the question. My point in asking the question about world leaders in the news media is what is really going on here? What are they going to use this for? Is the question? Do you think?
Well, it's very important. That's a very important question because why is it that now? First of all, one has to ask why Nelson Mandela? Why should he be? Even if what they said about him were true, if his hagiographers and supporters, if it was true that he went to prison, he wasn't a member of the Communist Party, he strived to win freedom for his people. How would that qualify him for this incomparable image making that we see going all over the world? As I pointed out in my article, and I gave a number of examples, there are countless thousands of people who are true, genuine freedom fighters, some of whom took up arms, but not as terrorists, but as genuine freedom fighters, many of whom have been stuck in gulags, in prisons, for decades, many of whom died in many of them prominent clergy and academics and scholars and whatnot. None of them have received any of the a modicum of the praise and adulation that he has been showered with. And that speaks again to this whole agenda. And I think that the agenda is this. No other organization other than the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and all of its ancillary parties throughout the world has the global network that they did and still do. So particularly before the so-called fall of communism in 1990, throughout the world, we would see repeatedly campaigns where a campaign to free someone from prison or a campaign against a particular country when it was organized. And pretty soon you'd see demonstrations in all the major cities of the world. How does that happen?
Right.
That doesn't happen unless you have actual organization. You can mobilize your people. And who had that kind of organization? Only the communist, worldwide communist apparatus. However, they had more than that, because we see here in the United States, as well as many of these other countries, that the communist parties by themselves were not strong enough to do this. They had to have the willing and ready complicity of operatives in government who weren't necessarily communists, but who were pushing their agenda. And those people we usually refer to as globalists. Some of them actually are communists, some secret, some open. But many of them who operate in government are simply working for world government, and that's the same program that the communists are after. So, for instance, today we see in prominent places around the world. Down in Brazil, Dilma Rousseff is the president of Brazil, one of the biggest economies and biggest countries in the world. She is a communist. Now, people won't say that she is, but during the 1960s, 70s, when she was running around, she was an actual terrorist. They had wanted posters for her. She was, you have pictures of her with machine guns and ammo belts around her neck, and she was a wanted criminal. And then she was rehabilitated, and all of a sudden she's made into supposedly a respectable person, but she's still a member of the Sao Paulo Forum, which is the communist terrorist forum that was founded by Fidel Castro and other communist leaders of Latin America. They still hold their meetings every year. She is a proud member of that, as was her predecessor as president of Brazil, Lula da Silva. In Nicaragua, we have Daniel Ortega as the president. In Venezuela, he was a communist Sandinista terrorist leader. Right. He's still the president there now. Now he's supposedly a moderate. In Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, who was boasted of being a Maoist communist, passed on, but his vice president, Nicolas Maduro, is the same, cut from the same cloth. Of course, in Russia, we've got Vladimir Putin, KGB, FSB boss, who is now in charge there. And if I could run down dozens of other countries where this is the case, and many other countries, and in the European Union, where many of the Tom Hayden, Jane Fonda radicals of the 1960s are now in office. And of course, here in this country, another example, we have as president a former community organizer, comrade of Bill Ayers and other SDS and Weather Underground terrorists. So Nelson Mandela's the campaign right now to turn him into a demigod is of strategic importance, because after denying for decades that he was a communist, now they come out and finally admit it, it is after he's already been placed in everyone's minds as the father of
civil
world
rights
progress. And so now communism, a lot of the sting has been removed.
In other words, what you're saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is that after making this guy out to be, the second coming of Jesus, now, after he's dead, they say, okay, yeah, he was a communist, which somehow puts a good spin, a good face on communism. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, especially for the younger generations who do not recall any of the Iron Curtain, the Berlin Wall, the massacres, the Ukrainian genocide, the massive terrorist and other features of communism, total brutality and prison state conditions. That's
Bill,
all completely unknown to most.
Right, Bill. When I remember, we all remember where we were when we heard the wall came down. It started to come down. People coming through the wall. I remember like it was yesterday what I was thinking, and what I was thinking, honest to God, was in 10 or 15 years from now, at the time, 20 years, whatever it is. There's going to be a whole group of young people that have no idea just how disgustingly evil and wicked communism is and what these people have done. What Castro did, what they did what Stalin did, what Mao did. And you go, this romanticization of this somehow, paradise, socialist paradise. It doesn't exist. And I think that what I was thinking has come to pass.
Well, that is exactly true. In fact, not only do they not know what happened, you've probably seen some of the YouTube videos or news videos where people on the street are questioned. They're 20-somethings or even sometimes 30-somethings. Who is Fidel Castro? They don't know. Who is Mao Zedong? I don't know. Some of them even ask who is Adolf Hitler, and seemingly look like normal, sentient, intelligent beings walking down the street. I don't know.
Yeah, that's enough to scare you.
But they're wearing Che Guevara T-shirts and
goodness gracious.
Red shirts with the communist China yellow stars on them and other CCCP shirts. They've been taught that is fashionable.
And they don't have a clue.
Right. And so that's what I see as particularly the importance right now. We are seeing a revolution, an attempt to completely transform our society, global society, and particularly here in the United States. We see it happening with Obamacare, with all of the vast new intrusions of government into all spheres of our life. And now that is being done increasingly with the benediction of people like Nelson Mandela, who is being held up as this great hero because he endorsed communism, was a loyal communist, and it must be a good thing. So whatever one might hear about the evils of communism or the dread of communism must be false, and we should look toward a bright future because socialism, communism is what works. The
United Nations obviously is filled with, people who want to bring about more global control. It's got all kinds of despots in it. I mean, it's a disgusting organization. I wished it never existed. And if I had my way, we would be out of it and it would be away from us. The fact is, it's there. What are some facts that you've discovered over the years about the United Nations that should alarm freedom-loving people?
Well, I've been a correspondent, an accredited correspondent at the United Nations for the New American Magazine for nearly 30 years. I go there, and they try to keep me out, but I do have accreditation there, and I usually have to put up a stink and start making a lot of noise, and then finally they let me in. And that in itself should alarm people. This is the United States of America. We allow the press to try to get the truth, to tell the people the truth. They have so-called reporters and correspondents from every communist nation in the world there, and all the communist press there have to be certified, as in China, by the Communist Party there. You cannot get credentials unless you're certified as a good party member in good standing and spouting the party line. They don't mind that. They welcome all of those folks. They just don't like anyone who's critical of them. When I go there, I never cause a problem. I never have had pulled any kind of demonstration or stunt. I simply observe what's going on, go to the meetings, report on it. And
have you been harassed? This question.
Well, I have been harassed when I try to enter the UN in New York City, the UN headquarters, where they say, well, your credentials aren't in order. And I say, well, what do you mean? It's current, et cetera. They say, well, you don't qualify as a representative of the press. And I said, I've been a member of the National Press Club. I've been covering, I have security passes for the U.S. Federal Security Protective Services because I can go into courtrooms, and I have the LAPD police pass and other police departments. I've never caused any problems. I've been in the middle of the LA riots and other things. I never obstruct justice or interfere with anything.
So you're saying that they know who you are and they don't like what you have to say, and therefore
it's very clear. It's very clear when they looked at it. Then they asked me for a copy of my magazine. They look through it and they say, "Oh, no, this isn't going." So I have to lodge a protest and make a big issue of it. And eventually they've let me in. They were able to keep me and my colleagues out of the Global Warming Summit in Cancun in 2010 because in 2009 at the big Helsinki fiasco, I did some broadcasts from there exposing what was going on there, and I guess they didn't like that. So,
no, the power does not like to be reported on, and this is why I'm so frustrated, and so many Americans are frustrated. And around the world, people are frustrated because they get, these reporters that don't want to say the truth. In America, the unique country in which, we have freedom of the press because we knew, as our founding fathers knew, that the freedom of the press was a way to be a watchdog up against government abuse. And now the press has become the government, it seems.
Well, the left likes to mouth that nice-sounding slogan, speaking truth to power.
Yeah.
But it's just the opposite. They will do everything it can to cover up the truth and to perpetuate unjust power. So that's what we see just about anywhere where the media in mass are promoting some individual and singing hosannas to him or her. Right. You can just about bet that it's some kind of villain, and vice versa. If someone is being vilified and demonized in the press, very often it is because they are truly attempting to speak truth to power.
Exactly.
And, the powers that be do not want to accept that.
And they'll do what they can to destroy you as well. Let's get back to the United Nations. Tell me what you found out about the United Nations that will shock us.
Right now, we just went through the past weekend, the anniversary of Pearl Harbor on December 7th. One of the key people that founded the United Nations was very important in bringing on Pearl Harbor. I've written about him quite a bit in the past. Harry Dexter White was a top Treasury Department official. In fact, he was really the de facto top economic advisor to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But it extended beyond that because he got into military matters, State Department matters, everything. He was a Soviet agent. And for years, for decades, all the academics and the media, and particularly those under the influence of the Council on Foreign Relations, denied that he was a Soviet agent, claimed that all the evidence that pointed in that direction, just as we see with Nelson Mandela, they said, no, there's no evidence that he was a Soviet agent. Now a number of books have been written. Soviet archives have been opened up somewhat. The Venona codes have been released, and we know without any question that Harry Dexter White was, like Alger Hiss and Lachlan Coury and many of the others who were identified, truly was a Soviet agent, a communist operative at the top levels of the American government. And he had an enormous impact. And one of the impacts that he had was to convince President Roosevelt, who did not need a whole lot of convincing, but he wrote the critical 10-point memorandum that was an ultimatum to Japan that really pushed Japan into attacking Pearl Harbor. He wanted to do that, not of his own initiative, but he was ordered to do so as a Soviet operative by the NKVD, which was what the KGB was called at that time. And his handler gave him the orders to do it. And the reason was this: if Japan could be pushed into attacking the United States, then they wouldn't have the resources to attack the Soviet Union. And the United States would bear the brunt of Japan's attack. So Harry Dexter White, operating in our White House and in the Treasury Department, succeeded in getting that pushed through so that American soldiers and sailors would die to advance the cause of his beloved Soviet Union. Now, that's important as it relates to the United Nations, because that was 1941. There were many other things that he did, but at the end of World War II, Harry Dexter White, and many other Soviet agents like Virginius Franco, Lachlan Coury, and others, were the key individuals that put together the two big conferences that reordered the whole world order after World War II. That was the Bretton Woods Conference in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire in 1944, which saw the construction of the designs created by Harry Dexter White for the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank for the economic restructuring of the world. Yeah. Remember, he's a Soviet agent. He's the one who designed the IMF and World Bank, which are still with us.
Yeah.
And then a few months later, he went on to San Francisco, where he was one of the key operatives in setting up the United Nations. And, of course, the United Nations, the key man there, the actual secretary of that whole conference, was none other than the notorious Soviet agent Alger Hiss. And Hiss appointed not only White, but a couple dozen other Soviet agents who were in our government to the top positions as delegates at the conference. So from the very beginning, if you look at the paternity of the UN and of the IMF and World Bank, these are the institutions which dominate the economic, and under the UN, eventually, increasingly, the political and social reorganization of the world. And those institutions are increasingly being empowered by the globalists and the communists and the international socialists to create more and more centralized power. If you look at communism, socialism, Marxism, Leninism, fascism, all of the collectivist systems of government, the one constant feature is that they always centralize and concentrate power.
Yeah, exactly. Which is the opposite of the what the American system is supposed to be,
absolutely.
Which is a decentralizing of power to the states and the people.
Checks and balances, distribution of powers.
Yep.
So what we have seen since World War II particularly has been an incredible centralization at the national level, state, local, and national level, centralization and concentration of power, with the government taking over more and more aspects of our lives, more and more features of all living that normally were carried out by private groups, individuals,
right.
Or if government was involved in those areas, under the American system, it was state and local governments that
exactly where you can keep, where you have an opportunity to keep people accountable on a local level. There's no accountability in the centralized power model, none at all. I mean, whoever gets fired for anything.
So that is what we see happening right now with the initiatives that the Obama administration is pushing forward, whether it's the Small Arms Treaty, the Arms Trade Treaty, or the one that they have now here on disabilities, which is before the Senate. It's to create international norms, which then the globalists in our government can say, oh, well, we signed this treaty, so now we have to make our laws conform with these international laws.
Right.
And so it is a huge power grab to centralize power even more. And
what you're saying, I think, is you agree with me that there's basically a new world order, globalist, Marxist agenda. Would you agree with that statement?
Well, absolutely, and they've been the organized globalists. We focused a lot of attention over the decades in the New American Magazine, and before that in the American Opinion Magazine, which was its predecessor. I wrote for that as well. We focused a great deal of attention on organizations such as the Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR. That is not the only organization, but it has been the principal front through which the organized one world subversive globalists have been operating. There are many others, the Trilateral Commission, the Carnegie Endowment, the Aspen Institute, and now the Clinton Global Initiative, and many others.
Right.
But the granddaddy of them, and the one that kind of is the superimposing authority, is still the CFR. And they are the ones who organize the big conferences and publish the Foreign Affairs Journal and the books, and actually provide the brain trust to populate all these other different organizations that are pushing the same thing. So there's no question that there is a design behind all of this, and that brings up the C word. No, not communist. That's kind of a verboten word these days too. But the C word being conspiracy.
Yes.
That means that we aren't just evolving in this direction
exactly
as a matter of spontaneous development of societal forces or historical forces, etc. We have been moving in this direction toward increasing centralized Orwellian government because individuals working together in organizations have been pushing us in that direction for decades.
Yes, and through numerous ways, not only politically, educationally, and in infiltrating universities. Every major institution in America has been infiltrated, including the church in many areas.
Absolutely.
Infiltrated with this insanity. And so, I'm a minister of the gospel, a pastor for over 22 years, and I preach against this stuff. There are some of us that stand up against what we see as evil, but we have you have a global propaganda machine that it's almost unstoppable. Don't you think?
Well, it would appear that way sometimes.
Yeah, I'm saying from the standpoint of your average person.
We know that. Well, yes, particularly when you see, for instance, this issue that we've been discussing today, Nelson Mandela, that they are capable of inciting global demonstrations and massive turnouts of people for various things like this, and so obviously the control of the mass media and mass thought creation is very, very important. If you have enough control over the media and enough entertainers and commentators and editorialists in your pocket, it's pretty amazing what one is able to do, particularly with a population that has already been conditioned with falsehoods, half-truths, and myths for most of their lives.
Exactly. I believe Barack Obama is a communist. You may or may not agree with me. If you don't, that's up to you. But I believe the man's a communist. Everything he does has to do with centralized power. Everything he does has to do with taking away individual liberty. Everything this man does has to do with grabbing more power. I believe the man is a communist.
Not only that, but I mean, even his ideology as revealed by many of his statements, many of his speeches. And then his whole background, his family background, the book that he wrote, his autobiography about his father. Jack Cashiel makes a very good analysis of that, a very credible analysis, pointing out that most likely that was actually written by William Ayers, Bill Ayers, the other underground terrorist. His whole history of working for Alinsky and then working with Ayers and terrorists in Chicago, it's quite astounding that he's been able to do this with so little comment about it in the major media.
Well, the question is, how does Barack Obama, if we're going to be really honest about it, how does this man become president when you think about it? I mean, he came out of nowhere.
Well, that's one of the most telling.
There is power behind this guy. There's something going on.
First of all, it's indisputable that he does have a facility for communicating. It's he can give a good speech if the teleprompter's on and everything.
Right, if it's on.
Okay,
right.
But that does not make one a president. Here he comes out of the state senate, where he was barely known in Illinois, jumps into the U.S. Senate, is not even there barely long enough to learn where the men's room is, and all of a sudden there are people automatically clamoring for him to be president without any of his background being known. In fact, in spite of great efforts to keep it concealed, we can't even view any of his school transcripts. We can't find anybody who knew him as a high school student, as a college student. There is no professor who knows anything about him and who can remember him at any of the schools where he was. It's quite a mystery, and to have him jump over the heads of everybody else, and all of a sudden be the contender for president, bespeaks very powerful moving forces in the background.
And not to mention, here's a guy who goes, to Germany, and you've got the streets filled with people. You've got now. Let me make something clear. I'm not a Bush fan. I didn't support President Bush. But we must
ditto here. We
look at this.
Very many very critical articles about him and his administration and his policies.
Right. Well, my point is, you had demonstrations against America and against Bush all over the world because of war. Obama gets in. Not only does he not stop the wars right away, but he bombs Libya. Where's all the protests around the world? Those so-called spontaneous protests. I mean, there's definitely got to be a power. I believe, I'm just going to tell you what I believe. I believe the man is a communist. I believe the man has communists behind him. The powers that be, globalists, have put this guy in office. That's what I believe based on the evidence that I look at. I'm not afraid to say that, and that's how I feel about it.
If you look at just right now, this week as we're talking, President Obama has pushed through, it appears that it's going to go through in Afghanistan, a new agreement to keep America there another 10 years. Now, this was one of his big promises in his campaign, and one of the reasons why so many young people voted for him, supposedly, was because he was the peace candidate. he was going to get us out of the war, bring all the troops home. Then it keeps rolling back the date, and then pretty soon it's back to 2014. Now he's concluded a new agreement with Karzai in Afghanistan. Says we're going to keep at least probably 8,000 to 10,000 troops / advisors there for another 10 years till 2024. Where are the protests in the streets? Where are the defectors from the Democratic camp saying, "Hey, wait a minute, we're broke, we're bankrupt, we've had all these people killed over there of our own and of Afghani civilians. The Karzai regime has proven itself totally corrupt." Has siphoned off billions of the dollars that our taxpayers have sent over there.
Right.
And moreover,
what else is new?
He's allied himself with Iran and with other enemies of the United States. So what's the point of this? And again, it speaks to the effectiveness of the control of the media that this has not even risen as a major issue.
Of course, and of course the global cabal is not going to now protest against him for anything because they put him there. That's my view.
Well,
that's my view.
The consolation is that it's a consolation that we still have the ability to have shows like this that you're hosting today, that we still have access to the Internet, the ability to get independent sources of news.
Right.
But that consolation could disappear very rapidly. If
I believe there'll be as much
that the Obama administration and its willing accomplices, Republican and Democrat in Congress, are allowing to move forward. The legislation SOPA and ACTA, which were going to use the copyright infringement laws to try and shut down the Internet, were defeated in Congress. But now the administration is pushing that through in various UN treaties. The most recent one, if they push it through, would end up accomplishing the same thing. So they want to be able to shut down our means of communication, our means of getting independent news and analysis and commentary out to the American people.
Yes, there's no question about the fact. There's no question about the fact that they're going to try to shut down news organizations that are not in favor of them. Any citizens, the Internet, any information, they're going to try to shut it down. And people listening to me, you better believe it. You better believe that they will come after anybody who's in the way of their agenda. That has been what the history of despots, and that is what's going to happen. And so it's incumbent upon free people in the world to stand up and to not tolerate it. And if we tolerate it, especially in the West, if we have an opportunity to not tolerate it, then we'll have our children and our grandchildren cursing our names for letting them go into this type of tyranny because we would not stand. And I think
right now we still have the ability to do that. But in China or for instance, right now in Ukraine, you may have seen some of the demonstrations in Ukraine. They are tracking down the people who make comments on the Internet. They're shutting down ISPs that don't meet their demands. They put up their communist firewalls there, as they've done in China. And so when one is blessed with freedom, one has an obligation both for one's own safety as well as for posterity.
Right. Well, listen, we're unfortunately coming to the end. I could talk to you for hours about this most incredible topic and a very interesting guest. Thank you so much for joining us, and I do hope to talk to you again as soon as I can. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Pastor.
Take care now.